Bleaching occurred on the Great Barrier Reef in 2016, and tragically again a year later in 2017, and then a year ago in 2020. So we've seen 3 bleaching events on the Great Barrier Reef in just 5 or 6 years. With just those 3 events since 2016, about 98% of the reefs on the Great Barrier Reef have experienced mild to severe levels of bleaching.
Corals are animals, and they contain tiny little algae in their tissue that provide them with energy and also with color. The algae are doing photosynthesis like any plant, and when it's too hot, then they're producing some substances that are toxic to the coral. And so the coral basically expels the algae and the corals start looking white, and that's what we call in coral bleaching. If the bleaching lasts long enough, then the corals starve because they don't have the algae to feed them.
In late 2015, as the temperatures at the beginning of summer were ramping up and up and up, we knew that a severe bleaching event was highly likely. I convened a nationwide group. We called it the National Coral Bleaching Task Force. It comprised all of the nodes of our centre and our partners. Because at that time we were a diverse and very large group, we could put a small army of people in the air and underwater to measure the extent of bleaching at the scale of the Great Barrier Reef. And there are very few groups around the world who could attempt research at that sort of scale. It takes about 8 days in a small plane to crisscross the length of the Great Barrier Reef. We fly very low and we record the extent of the bleaching as we crisscross about 1,000 reefs.
Because they were up in the air doing aerial surveys, obviously every day they would learn more about what was happening with the bleaching event, and straight away they would communicate that back to us, so we were able to keep everybody from local school children to the Minister for Environment informed about what was happening on the Great Barrier Reef during those huge and very important events.
I think it was absolutely amazing how quickly the centre was able to mobilize scientists all over the country to monitor this event, and I think we were among the first to really be out there on the reefs and to document what was happening. And then we were also able to use the same technologies and methodologies. We were able to produce data sets that really very few other people or institutions in the world can produce, and this has a huge impact on our understanding of how these increasingly frequent and intense bleaching events will actually impact the resilience and the future of coral reefs worldwide, not just in Australia.
It has had a huge ecological impact, particularly the 2016 event, which was the most extreme. It killed about 51% of the corals in the northern third of the Great Barrier Reef. On some reefs in 2016, in the far northern part of the Great Barrier Reef, we saw more than 80% of the corals die over a very short period. That was really shocking. In 2017, we set out to look at the consequences for the reproduction and replenishment of corals on the reef. We found a huge drop in the number of babies that were produced after those bleaching events. And that's really important for the replenishment of the Great Barrier Reef. Dead corals don't make babies. The capacity for the Great Barrier Reef to rebound from these not just 1 but now 3 bleaching events has been compromised. It's very confronting to see the level of damage that we have documented.
If we are to restrain global temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial, we get to a point where there will be a lot less coral, but there will be still coral. Perhaps as much as 30% of the corals today will survive. If we can flatten the curve essentially for temperature rise, we'll get to a point where corals may come back quite effectively because the conditions are stabilised. But if we don't, and we're on a current track at the moment where we don't do this, we will just get to temperatures where coral reefs will be a distant memory.
Scientific understanding from the Centre of Excellence is absolutely essential. We take that information, we build it into our communication products, particularly our Outlook report, and we also build it into our position statements. Our position on climate change is that the world needs to undertake the fastest and strongest possible action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In particular, meeting the objectives of the Paris Agreement is absolutely critical. So holding further warming to well below 2 degrees C, seeking options to keep it to only 1.5. Those are numbers that are absolutely essential for the future of the Great Barrier Reef.